Bon dia, welcome to Exploring Timor-Leste, the podcast that talks about Southeast Asia's best-kept travel secret. I'm your host Jonty, and I'll share first-hand insights, expert interviews, and practical travel tips. Whether you're a traveller, a culture lover, or just curious about places rarely covered in the mainstream, you're in the right place. Let's explore Timor-Leste. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about Liquiçá, which is one of the easiest municipalities to get to from Dili. It is just to the west. You probably think you're still in Dili, but when you drive past Dili Rock, you've entered into Liquiçá. So Liquiçá is both beautiful and historic. It has very nice beaches, there are some impressive hills inland, and there's quite a few historic sites to visit. You could probably see most things in Liquiçá within a day if you had your own transport, and once you escape the Dili traffic, a scooter or a two-wheeled drive car will be fine to explore the roads of Liquiçá. So to talk about some of the sites and places you can visit in Liquiçá, this won't be quite in the order you do if you drive out of Dili, but more in the kind of order of which ones I think are the best ones to visit as a tourist. So the first site is the Apelelo prison. This is about 40 minutes drive west of Dili. So this is a prison that was built by the Portuguese in the late 19th century, and they expanded it in 1914. And it was used to house criminals and political prisoners from across the Portuguese colonial empire at the time, which included places as far away as Macau, and it was in operation until just before the Second World War. It was a site of torture and common mistreatment of prisoners, including mixing broken glass in with inmates' food. And apparently Apelelo means bitter water, which refers to the abuses that took place there. During World War II, the Japanese used it as a command centre before it fell into disrepair. In 2012, the site was restored, and it is probably one of the only sites in Timor-Leste that has informative information panels for tourists. So there's maybe half a dozen panels around the site which explain the history and what you're seeing. Hopefully there'll be more other sites in Timor-Leste to come, but at the moment this is a bit of a novelty. They did plan to build a museum, a shop and a restaurant, but as of 2025 they don't exist. But it is still an atmospheric and a relatively easy place to visit for those interested in historic sites. And there's actually quite a nice beach. The prison is pretty much built by the beach. As with many of the municipalities in Timor-Leste, there is a town which has the same name as the municipality. So Liquiçá is the largest town in the municipality. It's home to about 5,000 people. So it's a pretty small town by most places' standards, but it's fairly large by Timor standards. And there's quite a few historic sites around the town, but in varying degrees of disrepair, may not be that easy to find. The town was very heavily damaged by the Indonesians when they left in 1999. They had very much a scorched earth policy when they left, and it was the site of some of the most notorious events of that period. So on April the 6th, 1999, up to 200 Timorese were massacred by the Indonesian militia as they sheltered in a priest's house next to the main church. The bodies of many of the victims were disposed of in Lake Mubara, which I'll come on to a bit later. The church has since been restored and quite extensively expanded. I noticed when I was flying my drone in the area that there's a shrine to the Virgin Mary on top of one of the neighbouring buildings to the church. So you could only really see it from the air. It was slightly unexpected, but yeah, it's just to the left if you're looking directly towards the church. Opposite the church is the well-maintained Parc de Liquiçá, and that has various monuments and statues. And the attractive former residence of the colonial administrator of Liquiçá is also across the road from the park and was restored recently in 2023. When you first enter the town on the eastern end, there is a colourful memorial to a hero of the Timorese independence movement with blue tiled steps leading up to a painted bust. These are quite common sights throughout Timor-Leste. And then when you drive through Liquiçá town, it's not entirely obvious because the main road is set away back, but Liquiçá does have quite an attractive beachfront, and there are a number of restaurants and hotels along there, including La Huta Beach Escape and Almar du Mar Resort, which are popular places with particularly expats or Timorese escaping Dili. Liquiçá is only about 50 minutes to an hour's drive, so it's easy to get out of town. It's much quieter than things in Dili. Heading further west from Liquiçá town is the town of Mubara. This is about 50 kilometres west of Dili, so maybe an hour and a quarter, hour and a half, depending on road conditions. Mubara has quite a lot of interest to explore. It's best known for the Dutch fort, which was built in 1756, which was swapped with the Portuguese for the island of Flores, which is now in Indonesia, in 1859. The impressive walls and a couple of cannons remain, and inside are huge trees and a late 20th century building home to a small local restaurant and handicraft store run by a local women's collective. Opposite the main entrance, there is also quite an extensive handicrafts market. A little bit further up the road is Mubara Church, which was built in the late 19th century neoclassical style. There's quite an extensive cemetery a bit further along. And if you head inland, which will require either a four-wheel drive or a motorbike because the road's pretty rough, there's a Posada de Mubara, which is a bit of a mouthful. Posadas are typically homes of important Portuguese colonial administrators, which have often been turned into hotels. And that's the plan with this Posada, is to turn to a hotel, but it's currently in progress. And once you leave Mubara, there's not a lot, to be honest, until you get to Atabai in Bobanara, although it is a scenic coastal road and it is one of the better roads in the country, as it is the main route between Dili and West Timor. Just to the east of Mubara is Lake Mubara, and this, although it has quite a tragic history, as I mentioned earlier, as Indonesian militia dumped bodies from the massacre there in 1999. These days, it is a very tranquil and peaceful place. There's a lot of seasonality. So during the wet season, it can cover up to 8 hectares, but during the dry season, it is significantly smaller. It's quite unusual as it's one of the larger lakes in Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste has surprisingly few lakes, but it's very close to the coast. So basically you've got the lake, then you've got the road, and then you've got the coast. And it's home to thousands of birds, including Australian pelicans and the occasional crocodile, depending on when you visit. And the lake and the surrounding area has been identified as an important bird area. Although I have to say I went there 3 times. I didn't see a lot of birds. I did hear some birds, and it's certainly quite a tranquil place to explore. Just by the lake is what looks like quite a nice little resort, which was actually set up with support from Korea in 2017. And they did a lot of work in terms of developing the site and planted lots of trees, and they built these resort buildings. But unfortunately, it seems to have been abandoned due to a lack of anybody to run the place. And when I visited last time, it was fenced up and seemingly abandoned. So this is something, unfortunately, you will see around Timor-Leste, as things started with great intent and often with some overseas aid and funding, and then the sustainability is a real challenge to keep things going in Timor, just given the relatively low number of tourists makes running a sustainable business quite challenging, and then Timor-Leste can be a challenging business environment in of itself. Now, closer to Dili, there is a community-run project at Kaitihu, which is to protect and hatch sea turtles. So this is near Olmea in Liquiçá, so maybe half an hour outside of Dili. And the centre can be visited, and if you're lucky, you may get a tour and chance to see the turtles. But the best chance of seeing the turtles is they do a release of the hatchlings, the baby turtles. Releases usually happen from 5 p.m. one Saturday a month, and check out their Facebook page to see the details of when that will happen. Even closer back to Dili, like literally across the bay from where Dili ends, is the T-Bar Bay Port. You can probably see this from the air when you come in on the plane, but certainly if you head west from Dili, you cannot but notice the very large port structure. So this was the largest infrastructure project in Timor-Leste's history when it opened in September 2022, and it replaced Dili Port as the main port for the country. And it was the country's first public-private partnership, with a French group gaining a 30-year concession to build and operate the container port. As part of the concession for building the port, they did a lot of regeneration work on the nearby mangroves in T-Bar, which was handed over to the local community in 2024. Now, there are extensive boardwalks. There must be at least 500 metres of boardwalk. There was a lot more boardwalk than I was expecting when I walked into the place. And it is a fascinating place to visit, and you can see there's lots of crabs, and there's interesting kind of wildlife living in the mangroves. So that is a very interesting site to see, and it's relatively easy to access. You can get a Mikrolet out to Tasitolu and then get a 50 cents tom-tom from Tasitolu to T-Bar, and then you can walk around the mangroves. I think it's $1 entry for adults, and it's open every day, normally from 9 till 7. Now, to get even more off the beaten track in Liquiçá, if you head up into the hills, there is a small village called Baz Tete, which is about 30 or 40 minutes drive inland from Apello. There is a road to it from Liquiçá town, but when I did it, it was under construction and it was absolutely terrifying to ride up. Very sandy and slippery, so if you're going to do it, it's better to take the sealed road from Apello. You just head inland, there's only kind of one road, and that's home to a sizable church and shrine, and there's also a waterfall nearby. Now, the road is sealed, but it is narrow and winding, but there are impressive views out across the coast from that, and it's obviously a bit cooler when you start getting up into the hills. Other than that, Liquiçá just has lots of nice beaches. So if you're just driving along the coastal road towards Bobanaro, you will see Almira Beach, which has beach huts. The Sandy Bottom, which is good for snorkeling and diving. It's opposite the Star Concrete Factory. That's your landmark to look out for. And it has an unexpectedly large number of public toilets, which is a rarity in Timor-Leste. They're not necessarily very well maintained, but there's, 15 toilets there, which is more than you probably have in the entirety of some other municipalities. And then there's the beach by the prison, which I mentioned earlier. In Liquiçá town itself, there's obviously a beach. And then Mubara has quite a nice beach opposite the historic fort where you can also go snorkeling. And all those areas are generally free of crocodiles. I won't guarantee it, but you're pretty unlikely to see a crocodile there. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour of what you can see and do in Liquiçá. Thank you so much for listening to Exploring Timor-Leste. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at exploringtimorleste@gmail.com. Until next time, obrigado ho adeus.